So once upon a time, there's a band called Muse, and I really liked Muse. They played good music. It was, it was catchy. It was progressive. It was well thought out. And then their lyrics started to get really preachy, and then their music started to get pretentious, and then they started to suck. And I feel like, I hope that's not the direction that American Gods is going, because this is a very preachy episode.
Welcome back to Shat on TV American Gods Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece for the hit Starz series American Gods. I'm one of your hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me is Gene Lyons.
This ain't Kentucky. Where's Kentucky?
And this is our deep dive episode where we look back at this week's episode of American Gods and share our insights, research, and opinions. This week's episode was entitled A Murder of Gods. On the run after the New Gods show of force, Shadow and Mr. Wednesday seek safe haven with one of Mr. Wednesday's oldest friends, Vulcan, the god of fire and the forge. Gene, Big D could not join us tonight. He's got a sick baby. So I'll ask you, what did you think?
I think these episodes are getting progressively stronger since episode 4. I wasn't a fan of 4, a little bit more enjoyment out of 5, and I got more enjoyment out of 6. I wouldn't call it a perfect episode by any means. I had some issues with it that we'll get into. But overall, I think that they're on the right track. These episodes are getting stronger, and these liberties that they're taking outside of the book are actually developing a world that I'm not 100% familiar with, which is great. It's good for the people who have read the books already and want something new out of the show.
Yeah, and most of the feedback that we receive from the audience has been positive in these detours that the shows are taking, right? Like, they're taking literal detours and figurative detours with the story. And I think it's, as a book reader or book listener, I am enjoying this story. It's more of an expansive world. My only problem is this is episode 6. There's only 2 more episodes of the season. How are they going to tighten this up and leave us with a satisfying finale that will not only tie any loose ends that the show has created, but also leave us wanting more next season?
I think we got a little bit of a taste of it in this episode with some God-on-God clashes. But I think a big part of it is that they've shown that they're not afraid to advance some plot lines to earlier. And so it might be the sort of thing where they took the, say they're doing 5 seasons. They took the 5 key climaxes of action and actually, maybe we'll wrap up each season with one. It doesn't necessarily have to be a chronological end, but rather just a scene from an eventual development that may just tie off a certain storyline. So like right now, we've initiated several storylines that don't necessarily exist in the book. You can tie those up without really ending the story. And so I think that's part of what they're doing. It's really, like you said, one of the things that the fans are saying right now is that they don't mind the addition of stuff just as long as it doesn't supplant stuff that they really cared about. And I think that the show is taking pains not to do that.
Yeah, definitely agree. So let's dive into those. If you've never listened to Shat on TV American Gods, here's the format for the show. We're going to talk in big overarching themes of the show. We're going to talk about big things that happened. We're not going to go through a regurgitation in a plot by plot or scene by scene format. We'll let you go search out podcasts that do that. We are going to get into spoilers. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, I do recommend you pausing the podcast, watching the show, then coming back and listening to the podcast. If we get things wrong, which we often do here over at Shat on TV, if you don't agree with anything that we say, or you do agree with our topics, then write into us. Our email address is hosts@shatontv.com. Again, that email address is hosts@shatontv.com. We do a read and response episode every Thursday to the top email listeners of the week called the American Gods Confessional. You can see all our listener email by visiting our website, shatontv.com, then clicking the American Gods Confessional. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe, share with a friend, follow us everywhere on social media. The topics that we're going to be discussing today, Gene, we're going to be talking about that first Coming to America vignette, the Jesus versus Jesus. We're going to also talk about We Can Be Heroes on a road trip. Also talk about Shadow and Mr. Wednesday's road trip action, catch up with them. Then we'll end on, well, the show may have just lost the whole gun lobby with the Vulcan Preach Fest. Those are the 4 main topics that we are going to discuss today. So, you and I were talking, I was flying back from Utah where I spent this past weekend, and I downloaded the show and I fell asleep about halfway through. When I landed, you actually picked me up from the airport, and we were talking about that Coming to America vignette and the Jesus versus Jesus. You thought it was a bit too preachy. I absolutely loved it. What didn't you like about it?
So you and I both live in Arizona. This is a border state, and we're not unfamiliar with Mexican immigration into the United States. You and I are both, admittedly very liberal in our stance upon that. We like welcoming immigrants with open arms and a path to citizenship and all of that. This is not to say that I don't agree with the overall message that it is a tough go, for the immigrant and that it is unnecessarily perilous. What bothered me was that knowing the way border crossings normally work, this was a very unlikely and inaccurate depiction of a border crossing. First of all, we had this very pastoral setting along the Rio Grande. We had people kind of at this nighttime, swim across, and then they're confronted by, the Americans. Looks like a scene out of E.T. with all their lights, who then open fire on them. It felt to me like it was an unnatural depiction of what actually happens there. Generally in these border crossings, if you are found by the Border Patrol, they will, lock you up or take you to jail or whatever. And then basically you get processed, sometimes even let into the country while they process all of your stuff, because you can have claims of asylum, whatever else. Now, of course, this isn't the Border Patrol. This is a militia. But again, if there was a massacre like this along the border by a militia, I understand where they're going with this, with the God versus God sort of thing. But when you take something serious, like an issue of immigration, or serious, like people's faith in their Jesus, I don't think you can play fast and loose with it like this.
I will counter with the fact that even here in Arizona, so one of the first meetings I had in my real life day-to-day job was with the state of Arizona. And they were talking about their militia. They literally had a posse that they trained. It's off the books. Like, they don't pay these people, but there are, in fact, militiamen that exist in the state. And I was blown away. I was like, wait a minute, there's volunteers that you just allow to roam around the border with guns. There was at one point more organization. Now, if you've watched any of the documentaries or read some of the news reports, these homegrown border militias, they all have splintered into these different factions. So you have to imagine some of these factions are probably a little bit more hardcore. I mean, why would they be roaming around with guns unless they didn't plan on using them? And so if you take those ideas, or if you're watching those documentaries, some of those people are crazy. Some of those people, I would have to imagine, even though you're not seeing it necessarily in the news, I imagine some of those militiamen have gunned down innocent people trying to cross the border.
Okay, that imagination is a very dangerous thing. There's nothing to substantiate that belief. So let's talk about what we know. So two things that this episode did, or twice that they did it, essentially, was that they have vilified and oversimplified a population among Americans, both in the Vulcan scene and let's start with this, Jesus versus Jesus scene, where essentially you see the rifles, they've got religious scripture on them. We're saying that these are the Americans with the guns and they're Jesus, and they just want to, shoot Mexicans and slaughter them with some weird night scopes that don't really look in any way authentic. They're getting headshots on people running in the dark. This basically borders on propaganda. Now, what they're trying to do, I'll speak to the quality of this scene, or what they're attempting to do, is that you've got a Jesus that saves lives versus a Jesus that drives people to take lives. And there's a dreadful irony to that. Christians on both sides of the border, Christians from one side rejecting other Christians, basically people on two sides of the same religion who are killing each other. It doesn't make sense. And then, of course, they take the opportunity to show us the Vulcan bullet, sort of foreshadowing the God of Guns, who will appear later in the episode. So it begs the question, is it Vulcan versus Jesus or Jesus versus Jesus? I think that kind of muddied the waters a bit.
If these militiamen, these fundamentalist Christians, right, which is, I guess, the idea some people have of fundamentalist Christianity in America, and you can see that in the political landscape, where they mask their religion to carry out atrocities. And it happens in every religion. We're not just singling out Christianity, but we're talking about it because it happens in the show. There's one person that you said is holding the gun. He's got scripture on his rifle. And I think in the other hand, he's got a rosary, right? And he's shooting people who believe in Jesus, right? But as the book points out, there's different variations of Jesus. There's a Mexican Jesus, there's an American Jesus. So the question I ask you, what does the American Jesus look like? Is he also riding a velociraptor with his AK-47? Is that the American Jesus we're going to see in the show?
No, he's going to look like Daniel Faraday from Lost. But the thing is I guess what bothers me about this is just that Madonna had a great video for like a prayer,
right?
Yeah. And like a prayer, there's a Jesus figure there, but they didn't have to make him look like the Mexican version of Jesus. And I get that this is the Jesus that Mexicans believe in, supposedly. But that's another thing that really bothered me was, man, they were so hammy with the symbolism. You had the rosary on the American side. Then you had the Jesus. He had to walk on water, of course. He's got to have the beard and the hair. And then when he finally gets gunned down, the bullet goes through his hand like the stigmata. There's a sacred heart of blood that, goes from his chest wound. And then a tumbleweed completes the picture as the crown of thorns. I mean, did you like this?
I did enjoy this. Listen, if you think of the religious symbolisms, listen, you can go to a carniceria.
Carniceria?
Yeah, that's
Carniceria.
Carniceria. Inevitably, there's an entire section devoted to Jesus and symbols of saints, and Christianity and Catholicism is rooted heavily in those type of symbols, right? Where you see it almost on everything. You see it in pictures, you see it in on candles, where you have the Jesus with the heart and the crown of thorns and all that stuff. So you have to understand that this is the symbolism that the show and the book is trying to portray here. I'm okay with it because they're using symbolisms like for other gods. Vulcan, especially with fire, and the metallurgy, and then the forge with Odin, or Mr. Wednesday with the eye and the crows. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have a god with those symbolisms that exist in other type of mythology and not do the same treatment with Jesus.
Here's the way I look at it. Here's how this scene could have been better, if not perfect, is you take one hint. Again, a la Westworld, you take one hint that this is Jesus. Maybe he's got long hair. Maybe he's the only one in sandals. Maybe, something that you saw, something you picked up minor. Or maybe the fact that you don't even notice that he's different. He rescues this guy and then he takes a bullet through the hand, and then you get the indication. For me, it's just that litany of clues that is just like beating me over. They're not trusting me as an audience member to detect what's going on here. So here's what you do. You have a scene where they cross like a normal border crossing, not the Rio Grande, which does not look like that in most places. Maybe they're going through a checkpoint. Maybe they're just going across the open desert. They encounter the militiamen. The militiamen are nervous, but they are also trying to do their duty. They believe in themselves. And maybe one of them gets jumpy, fires on accident, or gets a itchy trigger finger or whatever, and it rips through Jesus alone and thereby martyrs him. And then you go, okay, that's a scene. They don't fucking go balls out and massacre 20 people. It just seems it surpasses belief and just becomes something silly.
All right. Because I know we're probably going to get angry letters about this and people fact checking us. I did do some research on this. The Rio Grande is the longest border along the Mexican-U.S. border. It's over 1,000 miles. It is ever shifting, and there are a lot of refugees and immigrants that cross that border daily. Now, it's not quite as mighty as the Rio Grande used to be because of industrial damming, but that doesn't mean that immigrants don't cross the Rio Grande all the time. In fact, they do. A lot of them don't swim over. They usually take rafts or some sort of other device. But people do cross the Rio Grande daily. And it is a thing that does happen a lot. Now, in terms of border militia gunning them down, you're probably right. That probably doesn't happen a lot. But I think based on the theme of what they're trying to invoke in the show, they're taking artistic liberty right here. This is a show. This is a graphic novel. This is a comic book come to life, if you will. And you can almost, especially in this political landscape, believe that there's people who want to do this. There's probably people who were cheering on this scene.
I think that, again, it's an oversimplification. People are complex. There are people who want to protect the border, who have a very warm feeling, humanitarian feeling toward immigrants, just don't want them to cross. They don't want them to break the law. You got other people who do want to kill, who aren't necessarily religious. So it's like, it's a caricature. Once again, it's a caricature of actual people. When you have a real political situation that's happening in the world, caricatures are dangerous. So imagine this flipped around, Imagine this where all the Mexicans crossed the border and then went to a border town and started raping and pillaging everyone. And then American Jesus was there to protect the people of Texas. What if that was the situation? Would you think it was silly then?
Well, then the show would obviously be canceled because no one would want to watch that. That'd be terrible. But I mean, I think the point that you're making is a question that Dick rose. Does this mean the gods also conduct holy wars on believers of other faiths? He was under the impression that they could only vie for their devotion. Extermination of non-believers makes this a whole new ball game for the old gods.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people do get caught in the crossfire all the time. Holy wars are a reality and have been forever, and I mean, that is essentially two people killing for their own god. So yeah, that's absolutely a reality in this world. The question is, again, is that if this was really meant to be a Jesus versus Jesus, I think we might have actually, I don't know, seen another Jesus, which would have taken this show to another level of dumb if they had, like, you know, two Jesuses fighting it out on the battlefield. Although I'd probably watch that.
The people that were shooting the Mexicans crossing the border, even though they had their religious symbols of Christianity, do you believe that those were believers of Vulcan or believers of Jesus?
Right. Yeah. I think that's the thing is once we see that round exit the rifle, we understand that these are believers in Vulcan. These are not like, this is not true Christianity, but rather it's a belief in the gun and fire and in America, a la Vulcan, Virginia. Like that's definitely the message here.
Yeah, and I think the show does an effective job of doing that. Once we get to Vulcan, Virginia, and I don't want to jump ahead here on our topics, but Mr. Wednesday does say there are multiple Americas. This is one version of America you're seeing. And listen, America's a huge country. I don't think it's preachy because I enjoyed it, maybe, but I do believe that the show is trying to make a point, and that point came across effectively.
Yeah, I mean, again, to me, it's a matter of you could have had a 5-year-old write this scene basically where it's like, okay, Mexicans, good, crossing border, good. They believe in Jesus, good, and poor them. And then you've got, oh, Americans, bad. They show up in their trucks with their guns and they kill Mexicans. They're bad. And they even killed Jesus. They're that bad. They're so bad they killed Jesus. Oh, Americans. You know, it's just dumb writing.
Yeah, but listen, you have 40 minutes or 50 minutes to tell a story. I think if you had done it your way, which would have been fine, I would have enjoyed that. I don't think it would have come across as effective as what the show is trying to go for, as what they're trying to depict.
So villainizing an entire segment of America is okay as long as it makes the show work?
No, I'm not vilifying all gun owners, but I am vilifying those who want to preach the gospel while at the same time believing that it's okay to kill immigrants and protect our border at any cost when that's not the true teachings of Christianity, and certainly not what's in the New Testament. Jesus was the ultimate hippie. He was the one who was against the all-powerful and the corrupt priests. So, you know, I don't know. That's Roger Roper. Hey, listen, if you don't agree with me, write in. Host at shadontv.com. The only thing I didn't like about this scene, I will say this, is they went back to that script or Meanwhile in America or Coming to America scene. I thought we had passed that as an audience.
I didn't even notice that. Where was it?
Yeah, it was right in the beginning. They had the pen again, and Meanwhile in America or somewhere. I mean, you didn't need that.
Yeah, I must have been grabbing my Coke Zero and just missed that entirely.
Well, the next topic that we're going to discuss is all these characters, all these gods that we're seeing, including Laura Moon, who's not a god. All of them seem to be on road trips, and they all seem to have some sort of superhero power. Do you like where this show is taking it in that regards?
Dude, I honestly thought that like they were going to all jump into a Nissan Versa. Like I felt like I was watching an episode of Heroes. Like, okay, so I'm Salim and my thing is I drive a cab. I guess that's my power, or I guess I can have sex with an Ifrit and survive. I don't know. And then you got, I'm Laura. I've got super strength and I'm dead. And then you got, Mad Sweeney. I'm a leprechaun. I can make gold and also make up terms like leprechaun. Like, I don't know what the hell they're doing, but I've been waiting for this scene where I can finally say, Raj, you've got to at least think that this is ridiculous. So I'm sitting there wondering, okay, how are they going to make 5 seasons out of this book? And now I know. They turn the show into Heroes. Everybody's got a superpower. And then you can have any thrilling, sexy, or funny adventure you want because it doesn't matter. You just go on a road trip. Finally, I've got to ask you, now you've got Salim, Mad Sweeney, and Laura at a motel, going on a road trip to Indiana, hanging out at a bar and talking about anal sex. Do you finally think that this is ridiculous?
I felt that the Salim Ifrit scene was a powerful scene, a powerful gesture. Even in the book, it's 100 times more intense than depicted in, what was that, episode 2 or episode 3. And then we don't see Salim the rest of the time, unless I miss something while listening.
No, you're absolutely right.
For Salim to then come back and be, their driver on this road trip, I think does a disservice to the character. You talk about them adding layers onto the story and how our audience is okay with that as long as it doesn't take away. I think having the Salim character involved in this road trip with Mad Sweeney and Laura Moon is almost doing a disservice to the book because that scene is so powerful and so meaningful. And that's the problem that I have.
Yeah, I mean, this moment in the hotel room is supposed to change his life and his destiny forever. And basically have him take over the role of the Ifrit. And instead now he's just like, oh, I can leave New York. I can go wherever the hell I want with this taxi cab. It did make for some, like, some funny banter. I thought the anal sex, metaphor was, it was clever. I thought it was all right. But again, I felt like it was a bunch of buildup for just a gag. What really, I think, troubles me about the whole thing is that I feel like they're just trying to figure out ways to get people from point A to point B. So at first you had Laura show up at Audrey's house. Why would she show up there? Oh, to get a ride, and then Audrey drives her for some inexplicable reason. Some people have surmised that maybe she and Audrey were better friends than we know. And then you've got, again, now they're like, how are Laura and Mad Sweeney going to get to Kentucky? Oh, I know. Salim shows up to drive them, which, why couldn't they just take a car? I don't know. So I can only guess that he's going to play some bigger role later on. And I hope that they don't totally screw that up. A lot of people were curious about like what was up with the Kentucky, Indiana thing. And we kind of talked about that a bit. Do you think that was a necessary detour or did it help at all with your understanding of the show?
I understand that Mad Sweeney has proposed this idea of resurrection to her and that he knows a guy who knows a guy who knows Jesus Christ. And so I didn't quite understand why she would want to take a detour going the complete opposite way. If she can see Shadow from, miles away because he's glowing out in the horizon, why she would want to turn away and go the exact opposite direction. I completely didn't get that.
Yeah, so the only sense I can make of this was that they were going to Kentucky. They decided, fuck Mad Sweeney because he's a pain in the ass, and we're going to play a prank on him and go to Indiana instead. Now, in that, you see that Laura goes back and she visits her family. She goes and has a look at them. And I think that there was that recurring motif of fuck those assholes where Salim puts his past behind him. And Laura is being asked to put her past behind her, to let go Shadow and to move on. And she's torn. And I think that part of it was, she was looking to go back to life in Indiana or afterlife in Indiana and see what that was all about. And it was her way of saying goodbye to that life and continuing along her path to find Shadow. I just think that it was kind of a convoluted storyline that was really distracting from a really great storyline between Shadow and Mr. Wednesday.
Are we supposed to believe that bar exists in Indiana? The swamp bar, the gator bar?
The crocodile bar.
The crocodile. Why would there be a crocodile bar in the middle of Indiana?
Because it's cool.
but I thought maybe that was like a God's bar. Maybe God's hung out there or something like that. But no, that just seems to be a regular bar in Indiana where they can go and have light banter in a booth. So, on a meta level or on a deeper level, if they're trying to convey that, this is her trying to put her life behind her before she can move forward. Okay. I buy into that. And you're right. I did much rather prefer the road trip antics of Mr. Wednesday and Shadow, mainly because I think that those actors, Ricky Whittle and Ian McShane, are fun to watch. As much as I love Mad Sweeney and I think Laura are good characters, I'm just really loving this interplay between Shadow and Mr. Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I called out a couple episodes ago that these car scenes are really going to be significant to the show, and honestly, they've been some of my favorite scenes so far. So first you see them walking down the street. The lighting is really well done, very skillful. They move from moonlight to headlights when Mr. Wednesday is, I guess, giving Shadow medical treatment. So in those cases, they use a really great use of light. Even when Mr. Wednesday is driving in the night, you see kind of this golden glow on his face. It's really pleasant to look at, I think, and creepy. But the big thing we get here is confirmation of Mr. Wood's identity.
Huge kudos to our listener, Jackson. He wrote into the confessional last week saying that the tree that we saw in the police department was an associate of Mr. World called Mr. Wood, and Mr. Wood was part of Mr. World's spooks teams, which consisted of Mr. Stone, Mr. Town, and Mr. Rhodes. And that the spooks is the belief that there's a secret shadow, shady part of the government that watches everything that you do. I think that this is confirmed not only through that scene between Shadow and Mr. Wednesday, but also, again, jumping ahead, when they visit Vulcan and Wednesday looks up and sees the satellite moving across, and he's like, they have eyes everywhere. Listen, Jackson, I'm clapping to you, buddy. Thank you for writing in, and this is confirmation. So you were correct here. I like this, although it seemed like it was part of the Matrix, like they stole this from the original Matrix.
They're establishing one very important thing in this episode, and that is a clear message that gods can update themselves by becoming a part of Mr. World, right? That there's an exchange here. And now you see what it is that Mr. World wants of Mr. Wednesday, right? He wants him to fold in like this too. It's this exchange where you get newfound belief, you get power, you could become wealthy, you could become worshipped in essence, but you succumb to Mr. World. To talk about that transformation, this scene is a very good piece of writing where Mr. Wednesday says to Shadow, he says, "There's always been a God-shaped hole in man's head. Trees were the first to fill it. Mr. Wood was the trees. Mr. Wood was the forest." Now, he says all this under whispers. It's really hard to tell, so you got to kind of really pay attention. This is the service we provide you, people. He says, "Well, he was a very old god who saw something very new. He saw a God-fearing society turn toward complete industrialization. So what did he do? He sacrificed his trees, he sacrificed his forest, and he became something else." And that something else is what we see, that attacking force inside the police station that also manifests itself inside of Shadow's body and is growing in there as Mr. Wednesday pulls it out and throws it into the street.
And I like this idea because Mr. Wood, right? So if you think of like the first old gods here, especially in in America and a lot of the First Nations people, they worshipped the forest, right? Because the forest provided for them. And then as people moved away from a farming lifestyle or farming economy, moved on to an industrial age, we stopped worshiping the forest. We only looked at it as something that got in the way of our factories and got in the way of our suburban lifestyle and our suburban sprawl. So the idea that the woods and the forest would turn themselves over to Mr. World and become part of his team, I think is great. This idea that, they don't want to be forgotten.
Right. And you also see, Vulcan, also we see later in the episode, has joined the new gods as well. So it shows that the age of the god is irrelevant to their ability to evolve into new gods with a little bit of flexibility. And so it really begs the question now, who can you trust? Who's been converted? Obviously, Vulcan comes out and says it. Mr. Wood attacks Mr. Wednesday and Shadow. So you could see there that, he's obviously on the side of the new gods, but you got to think now that everybody they encounter, everybody they meet could be on either side of the game. And it's just a matter of sussing that out. Another great line as Shadow sees this thing pulled out of it. He says, this is, fucked up. Mr. Wednesday says, "Religion inspires in those who fear nothing, fear of the gods. And usually that fear requires a certain element of fucked up." And I thought that was it was a great line, perfectly delivered by Ian McShane. That's what he's getting paid to do here. And so it just kind of renewed my adoration of Mr. Wednesday. And he's really the reason I watched the show.
So break down that line there that Mr. Wednesday delivers. Religion inspires in those who fear nothing, fear of the gods. Help me understand what he's trying to say here.
So basically the idea is that the people who most need to be tamed, right? The people who most need to be subdued into devotion and into civilized behavior, depending on what culture you're adhering to. Those people fear nothing, right? And they would run wild essentially if they weren't given something to fear. So religion inspires in those people a fear of the gods. It gives them something to be afraid of because they're not afraid of anything in this world, like anything non-supernatural. And in order to instill that fear, it's got to be pretty fucked up. I mean, so you got to look at again, like you look at the Old Testament God, right? You had a wild world, and in order to civilize that world, you need to give them some serious shit to be afraid of. Now that we're a more civilized people, we have more fear in us than we, essentially have less need for a terrifying God.
So I was just like I said, I was in Utah this week, and I went to the Utah Museum of Natural History, and they had these skulls, or the plasters of skulls, not the real skulls, but they're essentially carbon copies of human skulls evolved through time. We believe in science. And so we believe that, yes, we did evolve as creatures because you see evolution happening all over if you look through the years. And anyway, so the point that I'm making is they had pictures of old man, back Neanderthal and early man, I guess is the correct term for it. And those,
I have the skull of an old man.
Yeah. But the way that we evolved is through not only conscious awareness of other people, but then creating a society. And how did we create that society? It was around a belief that there is a higher power controlling us, or we want to achieve a higher power. And through that, you need to have some sort of civil laws so to prevent, us from killing and having complete anarchy, and to stop us from going and having sex with our neighbor's wife and all that kind of stuff. And the ways to do that was to say, hey, you're going to die, or we're going to send down a swarm of locusts, or tell all these stories of bad things will happen to you if you do these things that we agree are bad for society as a whole. And that, that came through evolution, that came through thought. I just found that very interesting, because there were pictures of what I'm trying to say here is at the museum, there were pictures of early man throwing other early man off the cliff.
Sure. And if you look at it, there almost might be an evolutionary imperative there, where essentially those who were more ready to believe in something bigger, or had that part of their brain, we talk about the bicameral mind in Westworld, but basically people who had that ability to think in the abstract as a genetic disposition thrived, because they were able to band together. And so you could see that, there's an evolutionary explanation to all of that. And that goes along with monogamy and everything else. The prevalent thought with monogamy is that it started because infanticide, essentially, right? That a male would come along, see the child from another male and kill it. And the males that stuck around were able to defend their young, and therefore those populations grew, and we became a monogamous society. Again, it's a theory. Or it's not even a theory, it's a hypothesis.
Well, I was in Utah, so monogamy wasn't not one of the hypotheses that was floated around here at the museum. But the idea that man has evolved, and as a result, the skulls got bigger because they have bigger brains. I think that makes a lot of sense here. And so when you think about, growing the mind, having abstract thought and having creativity, that's typically what you see. You look at the Neanderthal skull, or they had the skull of it's only the hypothesis. I thought this was really cool, and you can do some research on it. They only existed. They were small little hobbit-like people that lived in the Indonesian areas, and they hypothesized that these men and women were this small because the islands that they were on didn't provide as much in order to survive and thrive in those conditions. They were very small and tiny, which I find very interesting. So anyway, go visit your local museum is what we're saying. Go visit your museum of natural history. Very cool. I'm about to go to Mexico City, and I hear they've got a great museum of natural history and anthropology down there. So the other thing that the Utah Museum of Natural History has is a whole exhibit on Vikings. And so I took some pictures of like Norse mythology, and they went into all like the whole thing. And so I was getting like a Odin boner, right? I was getting a hammer in my pants here. But we see another god introduced in this show, and it's not one that's in the book. It's Vulcan. Now, Vulcan is which god, Gene?
Vulcan is the Roman god of volcanoes, metalworking, fire, and the forge. So he is an ancient god. Again, that's something that should be pointed out if you missed that in the show, that he is an old god. He's often depicted with that blacksmith's hammer, making weapons on the forge.
And again, I think it's effectively done in the show when they visit Vulcan's house, played by the inevitable Corbin Burnson. And he's got all these animals up on his wall. Well, during the festival of Vulcan, or Vulcania, that was celebrated on August 23rd of each year, when summer heat placed crops and granaries at most risk of burning. Well, during these festival, bonfires were created in honor of Vulcan, to which live fish or animals were thrown as a sacrifice to be consumed in the place of humans. So when he says, I've sacrificed, and he's got all those animals up on his walls, I was like, well, these are the writers doing their homework and depicting a god who, had not only human sacrifice when you see the boss fall into the volcano, but also that, there's other animals that are being sacrificed in his name, just like it was back in the Roman era.
Yeah, I thought this is a cool idea to show that in a society, depending on its beliefs, certain gods can actually prosper because of what that society values. I like that. Now, what I didn't like, though, is that I felt like Vulcan as a town, that storyline was really preachy again. So once upon a time, there's a band called Muse, and I really liked Muse. They played good music. It was catchy. It was progressive. It was well thought out. And then their lyrics started to get really preachy, and then their music started to get pretentious, and then they started to suck. And I feel like, I hope that's not the direction that American Gods is going, because this is a very preachy episode. Again, I can't emphasize how disrespectful this is to people of America, particularly the Midwest and the South, where, you know, you have towns that are patriotic, they have a high percentage of gun owners, and they're not Nazis, they don't wear armbands, they don't have kids marching around in the streets with assault rifles. And it was just this over-the-top portrayal that I get it's fictional, but it's definitely taking a shot, no pun intended, at this segment of America and basically thumbing its nose at them. And it feels like elitist Hollywood bullshit that I think people will be turned off by.
What is the idea, or what is the theory that every conversation will eventually end up in comparing that other person to Adolf Hitler or Nazis? What is that called?
That's called Godwin's Law. So it's an internet adage that says basically, as an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Hitler approaches assuredness.
Here's where I do agree with you that the show got a little over the top is, yes, you're all right there. You know, and again, I grew up in the South. You grew up in Arizona. Both areas, both states, they love their guns. They're very vigilant about ensuring that freedom of gun ownership exists. My parents own guns. You know, a real life example is my parents in the early 2000s. I think this was 2004. My entire family, my stepdad, my mom, my sister, my aunt, my uncle, my grandparents, and my little cousin were all celebrating New Year's Day. They were together down in Miami in the Homestead area where my grandparents own a grove, and they were home invaded. And they were put up against the wall by men in ski masks, it was execution style. By the grace of God, they survived without incident. There was no rape. There was no beatings. No one died. But to this day, my uncle and my dad both conceal carry because it gives them peace of mind. So there are responsible gun owners that we all have. I do feel that anytime you use Nazi symbolism, which the show tried to do here with the armbands, and you saw the Vulcan factory with the red banners flying, I felt that was a little over the top. And again, I just got done saying in the beginning, you know, I really like the show. And even though it's a fictional depiction, you know, they're trying to get their point across. I felt that they could have maybe toned that down a little bit and not necessarily come across over the top. But, you know, this is, again, it's a fictional depiction. I think it's probably going to turn some people off because they went a little heavy handed at this entire storyline.
Yeah, and I think they mushed together another thing where everybody in town was white, and of course Shadow sees the noose in the tree out front, you know, where people had been hanged. It was essentially, and it's set in Virginia. I feel like it was just taking a shot at, look, Virginia does a lot of other things for this country too. You know, we talk about the use of bullets and Vulcan says that when somebody gets shot in a movie theater, you know, that it's a sacrifice to him. Well, you could have talked about other ways that bullets are used, like in wars on behalf of America to defend American interests. Or if you go back historically, maybe actually like, you know, spreading freedom across the world or something like that. Well, a lot of those soldiers come from a culture that is embedded in the South, and particularly in Virginia, where, you know, that produces the men and women who actually fight for this country. A lot of people saw this as taking a shot at Donald Trump, though. This is sort of a depiction of Trump's America. And although I could see that, you know, the way TV production works is that this was likely produced and shot well before you had a Trump in office.
Yeah, but you could see the Trump writing on the wall, right, when this show is being produced. And the fact that this was added on, this is an additional story that's not in the book, that was added on. And Neil Gaiman is on record as saying that he was most excited about introducing this character because of the political landscape and where he saw America going, I think is telling. Now, you know, is there a way to have done this effectively without necessarily singling out an entire population that'll probably protest this show if they haven't already?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could. Again, it didn't really work for me, but there was, let's talk about a couple things that, you know, that did work for it. I liked this character of Vulcan. I wish he would have stuck around longer, honestly.
Oh, without a doubt, Vulcan is by far the most interesting character. They kill him off, and again, make sure you've listened to this show, you watched the show before you listen to this. But yeah, he's killed off in this episode, and you think to yourself, they're bringing a character back like Salim. They're going to extend that character in the show and in the narrative. But then you have a fantastic actor in Corbin Burnson. You have a very interesting character in Vulcan, someone who's, hey, hey, I'm neutral in this whole fight. You know, I'm on the side of whatever is going to profiteer me the most. That's a fucking complex character that I want to know more about.
Yeah, and in addition, you know, he's nuanced. He kind of sends some messages to Mr. Wednesday that he is both going to honor their friendship and give him a subtle fuck you. I thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic. One of the things that he agrees to do is to make a sword for Mr. Wednesday, which Mr. Wednesday, you know, eventually uses on him. Odin, to be fair here, this is a note that Dick put down. He actually carried a spear, not a sword. He's also been depicted with a blacksmith's hammer. So any of those things would have probably been more believable than the sword. I thought that sword was fuck off huge. It reminded me of a Final Fantasy. And I don't think Ian McShane is very skilled at swordsmanship because that looked unnatural and heavy in his hand. He's also not really good at chest kicking.
You were telling me this as you were driving me back from the airport home. You were like, yeah, the only thing I didn't like that, wow, Ian McShane is really frail. It's been, you know, over 10 years since Deadwood, and it really shows. And so when I got to this scene in the episode, I was like, well, here it comes. Can't wait to see what Gene is talking about. And it turns out that he was perfectly fine swinging the sword. A lot of it was done off screen, or you couldn't even see Ian McShane swinging it. I thought he did a fine job. My biggest point that you made there is that Odin was traditionally not seen with a sword. I mean, I just did the whole freaking Vikings exhibit where they go into a lot of the mythology and a lot of the pendants and a lot of this private collection that's, you know, it's a touring collection, has little idols of Norse mythology, including Odin and his wife and Thor and Loki and all of them. Not one of them has him with a sword.
I invite anybody who hasn't already seen it to go Google or go to YouTube and look up the Dio video for Holy Diver. It's a music video. And in it, Dio, he's he's an impish man. And he's got this broadsword that he could barely lift up. He's dragging it around the set of this music video. And that's what this reminded me of. He looks so old with it. And you asked, why did they have to give him a real sword? I'm not even sure it is a real sword. I mean, it might even be foam and he's having trouble with it, but it looked a little weird. We did though get to watch Corbin Burnson's head fall off, which you pointed out, and tumble down into the vat of molten lava with him. So it was very Terminator 2. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So the idea that gods can kill other gods, and I guess even humans can kill other gods with the whole Jesus in the beginning, or is the whole idea of Jesus, because he's a god, but he's man in God form, that confuses me, even to this day. But so the idea here, or the question I'm asking is that whole scene showcasing the fact that gods can kill other gods?
I don't know. And that was kind of one of the things I was wondering about is it seems weird to bring Corbin Burnson in for just half of an episode. I've got to believe that you can't just take a god out like that. Like that seems way too simple, you know, as the rules have been established in this universe before. Mr. Wednesday said that basically that the only thing that can hurt them is being forgotten. Right. So
right.
I can only imagine that he will rise from this because people aren't going to stop believing in Vulcan. They're not going to stop believing in guns, you know, so I wonder if he'll make another appearance. I hope he does. I hope that this is one of those situations where not dying actually makes sense. And I think that it would be a service to the show and to the viewership if he came back in some form.
After he knocks him into the vat and Shadow's like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing all this? He then takes out his Odin's spear and urinates into the vat of lava, saying, I'm going to put a curse on you. Now, I'm assuming that he's cursed Vulcan and the bullets are now cursed. What's happening there?
Yeah, I think that's what happened. He peed into the molten metal, and then you see that a repeat of that bullet production scene where, you know, it's going through all the machinations of the factory. And so I'm guessing that, you know, I don't know what a cursed bullet does. Is it like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and they talk now and they fly around like cartoons? I don't know, but it is an exciting thing. You know, we don't have a lot of cliffhangers in this show. This isn't a cliffhanger type show. It's more of a closure at the end of each episode, but this is it's a subtle, what's going to happen with these bullets? Like what did he do to them exactly?
Right, exactly. And you have to imagine that the same believers of Vulcan are going to go out and then use those bullets. Well, I thought the whole idea that Mr. Wednesday was doing is that he wanted to recruit Vulcan to his side. So we learned that Vulcan is playing both sides. Right? He's forging a sword for Odin, but yet he's still producing bullets for Mr. World. So are now the bullets that you have to imagine the army that's on the side of Mr. World is using, those will then fail. I was not given this. There's no context for us to explain this to you.
Yeah, I don't think Vulcan's playing both sides, actually. I think that he is squarely on the side of Mr. World. He doesn't accept the Soma. He also, he calls basically Mr. World and tells him that Mr. Wednesday is there. The whole reason he was making the sword, was to stall. He was basically just trying to kill time until they could, presumably Mr. World or whoever he called to come, deal with Mr. Wednesday arrived. And so I think that Mr. Wednesday figured that out and took him out, but who knows how long that'll be. Shadow's reaction also to me felt a little weird. Like, I know it's not every day you see somebody get their head chopped off, but at the same time, like, you gotta imagine, again, we keep going back to this, like, Shadow's seen some shit. He had like a living tree pulled out of his gut. He saw, Marilyn Monroe fly into a room. His dead wife is alive. I think at this point I'd just be like, well, that guy lost his head, whatever.
Well, yeah, the reaction, I agree with you, was a little odd. Now, if you were Mr. Wednesday, Gene, and you and I were on a road trip together, and I had this piece of Matrix robot wood lurking in my little wound there, and you pulled off to the side of the road, took a swig of whiskey or whatever you were drinking, and calmed me, and then pulled that thing out, I would be forever indebted to you. I'd be like, listen, you can chop off as many heads as you want. You pulled this branch of this old god out of me. I'm squarely on your side. It seems as if Shadow is unsure of at the end which side he's going to be on. Why would he not want Wednesday to kill Vulcan?
Well, I mean, I think since he met Wednesday, all this shit's been happening, right? So like Mr. Wednesday was, there to tell him about, the details of his wife's death and Robbie's death. He's been there for every bad situation that's happened to Shadow over the last, month or so. And in addition to that, he just took him to a town where he has to hide from bullets, hide from people under the threat of being lynched, and then suffer racial slights from a comrade, essentially, in arms. I think that Shadow's right to think that he doesn't know what to think. I'm surprised. If I were him, I would have been like, fuck all this shit. I'm out.
Well, there's obviously some attachment. Do you believe, now we've talked about in previous episodes that you want the audience to understand that Mr. Wednesday may not necessarily be a good guy and Mr. World may not necessarily be a bad guy. Have you changed your tune at all?
No, not at all. And again, you see in the scene where they go back to the crocodile bar where Mad Sweeney is talking about what happened right over there, where he mentions to Laura that's where Shadow essentially sold himself to the devil, right? He did the mead. He did the deed, he basically has become Mr. Wednesday's man. He's no longer Laura's man. And so in that sense, if a leprechaun is telling you that another guy is pure evil, he's probably pure evil. So in essence, and then with Mr. World, again, like his tactics might not be anything to aspire to, but at the same time, like overall, are his motivations any worse than Mr. Wednesday's? We've seen Mr. Wednesday womanize. We've seen him lie, con people. We've seen him chop a dude's head off and put people in really risky situations. I'm not sure he's a good guy.
I don't know. He's pretty charming, and for that reason, I'm still on the side of Odin. So, or Mr. Wednesday, whatever you want to call it. So that's all the topics that we had written down. Before we close up shop, get ready for the confessional, and get to our shout outs, is there anything else you want to talk about this episode?
I just miss Big D.
So sad. Big D. Yeah, we hope your daughter's feeling better, and you listen, watching you go through this and listening to Big D sent it to both of us, right? The little MP3 file of his daughter screaming at the top of her head, and I think it was 11 o'clock his time. That is
sort of like a shotgun blast of phlegm or something. look, you and I don't have kids, and there's a reason for that, because we don't want to deal with that shit.
Exactly. That is perfect birth control is what we're saying. So, but Big D, we hope your daughter's doing well, and we love her. But all that stuff, we hope to have you back, later this week. So with that being said, Gene, let's get to our shout outs. What exactly is a shout out, and how can people worship us?
Well, Raj, a shout out is a feature of shoutontv.com. If you go to the website and scroll down, you'll see a little slide out, and that's how you get your shout out. So basically, we will read your name on the podcast as a thank you to you for listening. And this week's shout outs go out to Marty, Charisma, Ty E, and Giovanna. Thank you so much for listening and for sending in your shout outs. Again, if you want to get your name right on the podcast, just go to shoutontv.com and we will happily read that for you. Or if you have a bigger thought, you can go ahead and email us at host@shoutontv.com.
Yeah, and we will read the best emails of the week and on the confessional, which releases every Thursday. We're already getting a lot of them in. A lot of people are sacrificing their time to tell us what they think about this episode and what they think is going to happen in future episodes. So the competition is growing week by week, but please send those in. We love those. Even if your email isn't read on air, you can go in and see all the emails in their raw, unedited versions on our website, shoutontv.com. Just click on the confessional. Otherwise, that concludes this week's episode of Shout on TV American Gods Edition. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're everywhere, including Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. Our handle is at Shout on TV. We're also on Facebook. Just search for Shout on TV Podcasts. That website, once again, is shoutontv.com. Email hosts at shoutontv.com. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, be sure to leave a 5-star review. That really helps the podcast grow. You can also check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we review the best 80s and 90s movies from our childhood that you, the audience, vote on. You can check out all the information over there at shatthemovies.com. Gene, we just reviewed which movies over there?
We just did the amazing coming out this week, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is a goddamn masterpiece.
Yeah, you and I, listen, I was traveling, so I missed the episode. I was so bummed. I tweeted out that regardless of what you say about it, in my opinion, it's still a 0 wipes. I don't want to give any spoilers, but was I off base?
No, man, it is literally that movie, and please listen to it. People have said, like, we're too mean, we're too cynical, we don't love Batman, whatever. If you want to hear us really just fall in love with the movie, this movie could have been put out last week. It's that good.
Yeah. Excited to hear that episode. And then we're doing what? Starship Troopers next? Is that correct?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, can't wait for that. I love Paul Verhoeven, correct? Paul Verhoeven?
Yes.
Yeah, so be sure to check that out. Check out all the information over there at shatthemovies.com. On behalf of my buddy man Gene Lyons over there, who babysits my dogs when I do all this traveling, and Dick Ebert, who is at home with a sick baby, I'm Roger Roper. Be sure to join us be sure to join us this Tuesday for our American Gods Confessional booth, which I may or may not be on because I'll be in Denver and then I'm going to Mexico City. So, it may just be you and Dick Ebert. But, on behalf of, both of you guys and our entire audience, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. Take care. Good night and hail the old gods.
Call me your bun man?
I call him my bun man.
All right.